Hello, Manchester, and welcome to another edition of Girard at Large. I am your distracted and forgot to send my Jim O'Connell update photo host, Rich Girard. Thanks for tuning in. As you know, you can find us online at girardatlarge.com, and you can find us on Facebook and Twitter, also known as X, also at Girard at Large, where we encourage you to like us and to follow us. Why? Well, I can tell you in the next few days, there are going to be some bombshell stories hitting the front page involving topics that we have discussed and that I have worked diligently to try to double check. You know the old saying, measure twice, cut once, as potentially conflicting information has come my way, but we expect to be kicking those out the door certainly between now and the next show. And I will say, since I forgot to send the photos, I was going to do it when I got here, but got sidetracked. Jim O'Connell did not park in front of the handicap ramp out in front of this building last week, just like he didn't the week before. So hopefully the message has sunk in that blocking handicap ramps is not cool, especially when you're not even parking in a legitimate parking spot. And there are half a dozen of them 75 paces away, specifically for those of us who use those studios. All right, so now that we've got the Jim O'Connell update out of the way, I got to tell you, I'm not really sure where to start tonight, having looked at the Board of Mayor and Alderman agenda for the coming Tuesday and watched yet another brutal school board meeting. You know, there's something wrong with a school board meeting where more than an hour of the time is spent under quote-unquote new business. You know, between that and response to public comment, it's a never-ending bloviation cycle where people apparently, I mean, there was no actual business that was brought up under new business. There were people talking about whatever they wanted to talk about, but we'll probably get to that later. There are a couple of news stories out there, or something that hopefully will be a news story. I have in my hot little hands here a letter from the Manchester Police Department, Assistant Chief Ken Louie, who I've worked with in the past, decent guy. Seems that the police department wants the Board of Mayor and Aldermen to give them at least $30,000 from the city's contingency account to, well, fit up a new gym. You see, the police department has been looking to expand the ladies' locker room there, and well, according to the letter, thanks to Mayor Jay Rouet, they finally have the funds to expand the lady locker room. I remember Chief Oldenburg asking for that, and it's not so much that they actually need it now, but their projections of all the additional female officers that they're going to hire means that they're not going to have sufficient numbers of lockers for the ladies in the locker room, so they need to expand that. All well and good, I suppose. But here's the thing. I don't remember former Chief Oldenburg or any other discussion where they said, and oh, by the way, if we do this, we're going to have to get a new gym. I don't know how large the gym at the police station is. However, what I do know from the letter is that they have decided that, the 1,000 square feet they're going to have left after they expand the ladies' locker room is, well, not going to be sufficient for the remaining officers. Now, 1,000 feet is kind of a big space. I don't know how many people use the gym, how often, and over what period of time. But anyway, they're looking at space outside of the police department. And they have a couple, which only a quote for the retrofit of one was attached. Both of them are fairly close to the police station. In fact, one is across the street. So I'm thinking, given the spaces that they're looking at, in addition to coming up with at least $30,000 to do the retrofitting and to buy new equipment, I don't know why they can't just relocate the equipment that they have to the new space, but we need to fit up the space. They'll probably be looking at rent in addition to that. I wonder if that was something that was considered in their budget. But, you know, why am I bringing this up? Is it to pick on the police department? No. But it is to pick on a budget process or a process in general where departments in the city of Manchester come forward and say, hey, you know what, we need money to do the locker rooms for the women. Everybody goes, oh, yay, let's do that for the women. We love women cops. And then after they get the money to do the project, they turn around and they say, oh, by the way, we forgot to tell you that we're now going to need a brand new gym because, well, gee, we just won't be left with enough space for the, for the gym to service the 250 uniformed officers. Of course, not all 250 officers, I'm sure, use that space. But, it kind of begs another question. Of course, just about every fire station has got its own little, home gym kind of thing put in there. And at some point, I wonder as a taxpayer, what exactly am I not liable for in the operation of the city? Everybody else, and oh, not for nothing, I have recently obtained, and this will be one of the stories that I will be publishing, I have recently obtained a list of all of the city's employees for the calendar, for the last calendar year, 2024. And when you see what the folks who work for the city make, you might be asking yourself why you as a taxpayer have to come up with $30,000 plus God knows what else once they do open up a new space, because no one will say no to the police. Why people who are making over $200,000 a year need for the taxpayers to both provide them with a gym and the equipment in the gym and now pay the rent and whatever else comes with leasing a space because, oh yeah, they neglected to tell anybody when they when they proposed expanding the female locker rooms that they were going to need a new physical fitness facility because the expansion could only go into the gym. Yeah. So, you know how many items like this take place throughout the city budget? If I had seen this a little earlier than I did, I probably would have sat out and made, it goes all the way back, right? So back in the days when I used to be the budget director for the mayor of Manchester back in the 90s, I remember the fire department. It's just a little example. I remember the fire department, getting what was called an was it 800 or 900 trunking system. It was a communication system. They upgraded the radios, et cetera, the communication system. It was, okay, so we spend a crap ton of money on all of this stuff, and the very next budget, the budget after the radio system got installed, there was a brand new, never to be seen before, never have been spoken about before, $50,000 line item in the fire department's budget. So I called their budget guy, it was Brent Lemire at the time. I called it, Brent, what is this $50,000? Oh, those are the annual licensing fees for our new communication system. Really? Do you have any documentation on where those fees were laid out when you asked for the new communication system? And Brent's a good guy. I mean, I did a lot of budget stuff with him, but over and over, the point is I can go back almost 30 years and find examples of stuff like this throughout the city. And at some point, you have to come to the conclusion that you're either dealing with absent-minded people who aren't thinking it through and a board of mayor and aldermen, or even a mayor who aren't asking the right questions to, right, so you want to expand the space. Well, what happens after you expand the space? How are you going to? And lo and behold, gee, we need at least $30,000 to solve this problem that we created by expanding the locker room facilities without telling anybody that it was going to have this kind of an impact. So we're talking about, I guess, transparency and budgeting. So we'll take a quick jump over to the school board because there was an item that was approved without any fanfare at the Board of School Committee this past Tuesday night. Normally they meet on Monday. By the way, to all of those in our audience and beyond who have lost loved ones in service to our country, I hope that you had a blessed and consoled, peaceful Memorial Day. It's one of those things. do you really say Happy Memorial Day? I mean, you're supposed to commemorate those who gave all in service to their country. So is it, but it sounds weird to say, you know, Reverend Memorial Day, or I guess whatever it is you would say. But to those, to all those Gold Star families out there, you have our, you know, you have our prayers, you have our hearts, you have our utmost esteem and consideration for the sacrifice your loved one and your families have made on behalf of this country. And, you know, hopefully we will start to see a country behave in such a way as to not call into question whether or not paying the ultimate price was worth it. So, so the school board on Tuesday night had this item on the agenda, and it was a memorandum of understanding, or a tentative agreement really, with the union that represents the school nurses. So I looked at it and I thought it was a little odd that it was so short, but essentially what they did was okay, before I get into what they did, I have to explain to you how things work. So contracts here in the city of Manchester have what are called step and longevity raises. And on top of those, a step raise is an annual increase that you get. Basically, it's about 3% a year for the first 13 years of your career. And then you have what are called longevity steps. And longevity steps are like a double step. So when you get to year 5, year 10, year 15, instead of getting 3%, you get 6. And so this is how it works. Oh, and then on top of that, you have whatever cost of living adjustment, because getting 3% a year or 6% every 5 years, that's not enough. In addition to your 3% a year, you have to have your 2, 3, 4, 5% COLA, whatever it is. So yeah, you wonder why personnel costs are out of control in the city of Manchester. It's because you have a system like this, but I digress. And a system they made a whole lot worse with the new system that they just adopted, fast-tracked and pushed through for no other reason than, well, you know, we have to hit the open enrollment period for the health insurance. There were ways around it without suspending all the readings and hiding everything until the last minute. Oh, I know. Mayor Ruiz says he put out a press release. Yeah, that gets seen by exactly, what, 3 people? And we put it up on the website. Yeah, they put it up on the website. That got seen by, what, 2 people? Anyway, and I was one of them. And only after it was brought to my attention by somebody else who actually saw it. But so at the end of a contract, what happens is if there is no agreement to continue the contract, then the steps and the longevity increases are frozen because they're considered cost items. And as a cost item, they are a mandatory subject of bargaining, and they are not conveyed, or they're not supposed to be conveyed. There have been past boards, both the school board and the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, who have turned a blind eye to this and agreed to fund those step and longevity increases, you know, by pretending that they had to. You know, that practice stopped in the 90s. It did come back once or twice. I'd be hard-pressed at the moment to think of the unions that got them. Although there was an instance with the schools where we put them in the budget and the budget was approved. Therefore, the Board of Mayor and Aldermen approved our request to fund the steps and the longevities. I believe that happened under Joyce Craig. You know, all kinds of shenanigans like that. But anyway, so what they did with this contract is they said, oh, well, you know what? We have a tentative agreement with the union to give them the step and longevity increases that they would not get because we have not actually concluded negotiations and we don't have an agreement on anything else. So they removed from the union a primary incentive to negotiate, which is the freezing of their step and longevity raises. And believe me when I tell you, that's a pretty powerful motivator for the unions to get a deal done with the city, because once those steps are frozen, typically what happens is they're never given back. You know, this was a big deal when I was negotiating with the teachers because they were still complaining over steps and longevities that they had frozen in prior negotiations. But, you know, dishonest as they are, they forget that they got like a massive pay raise to offset the loss of those steps and longevities in the first year of the contract they were complaining about. There we have it. And I wonder whether or not the bare bones budget at the school board, where they have all of these cuts, meaning they're not expanding programs or filling certain vacancies and et cetera, et cetera. I wonder whether or not they budgeted those step and longevity increases. And if they did, gee, I don't recall seeing anything in their budget documents submitted to the school board or the Board of Mayor and Aldermen where the district administration said, oh yeah, our budget contains all of this money for pay raises. Now, you might be saying, well, it's just the school nurses, and there aren't very many of them, although they are expensive. But what I will tell you is this: whatever gets done for one union, it practically takes an act of God to prevent it from happening for another union. So they've set a precedent now where one of their key bargaining groups has gotten this lease on life. Oh, and yes, they must start negotiating by September 2025. Oh, great. Doesn't say when the negotiations have to end, but why do they care? They're going to get their step and longevity increases. And whoever won't get one of those is probably a tiny fraction of the group there, so no one's going to pay attention to what their cares or needs are. And the cycle continues. And once again, we're always looking at a situation where, hey, this is how much is in my bucket, says the union. How much more are you going to put in my bucket? Well, if the city is going to just keep giving them pay raises and remove their primary incentive for coming back to the table, what's the point in having the negotiation? Okay, back to the city side of things before we really take a deep dive at some of the stuff that's happening in the schools. Well, you know what? While we're talking about the schools, let's talk about the proposed amendment to the city charter, shall we? I am amazed at the level of, I don't even know how to classify it, right? So you've got all these people on the school board and they made grand displays. Well, what are the aldermen looking for? Why do they want to do this? What's the practical effect? And the mayor made a statement he probably doesn't know is untrue, but I understand why he said it, because the research coming out of the city solicitor's office and a document provided by the city clerk are essentially saying, well, you know what, it is what it is. You really can't do anything about it. And the city clerk is not wrong in the document that he put out, saying, well, there really is no fundamental difference between the charter that was adopted in 1983 and the charter that was adopted in 1997. He's right. And all of these people say, well, state law requires this and state law requires that. You can't really make it, quote unquote, a department of the city. They're all right, but they're also all 100% wrong. And the mayor is turning this charter commission thing, or this charter amendment thing, to make the school district a department into this great, big, huge, complicated, we have to look at 200 different state laws, blah, 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 blah. No, you don't. So I'm going to explain it, and maybe I'll just have to drag myself up to City Hall. The problem with going to City Hall is I only get 3 minutes. And there's too much to talk about at City Hall, and I can't yet bring myself to go into the school board, but I will, because they either are completely, if not willfully, ignorant about some of the things that they're saying, or they just don't care that they're saying things that aren't true. So let me make this clear on the charter. First off, there's no big, the question that was on the ballot in 2001 that passed by a country mile when the voters wanted to repatriate the school district as a department, the language, as far as I'm concerned, is still valid. Now, let's get to the claim that there is no difference between, essentially no difference, minor wording changes, but in practice and function, there's essentially no difference between, how the charter referred to the schools in 1983 to when it was changed in 1996. This is true. But what that overlooks entirely, and what the city solicitor's letter to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen did not address at all was the fact that in I believe it was 1999, I was on the board of mayor and aldermen at the time, the school department filed a lawsuit in Superior Court to separate itself from the city. Okay? And Bob Baines, who spoke at length and rather, I was befuddled by his comments, was, talking about, he was mayor when the damn district got its independence. One would think he would know what the difference was. So for him to pretend that he doesn't know what the difference between how it operates now and how it operated when it was a department is a canard. Either that, or he's like me. The more hair that comes off the top, the more memory cells abandon ship because they're all attached to the hair follicles that leave, right? So here's the thing that everybody is missing. It's not about giving the mayor more control and authority. And I've talked to aldermen. I've sent them emails. I've tried to put this in their heads. And I don't know if look, at some point you just have to wonder whether or not anybody's paying attention or everybody is just doing their own thing for their own reason, their own purpose, or whatever it is. Because at the end of the day, and sometimes the best way to kill something that you don't want to be seen killing is to confuse everybody about what it's supposed to do or how it's going to work or why it's this big complex thing and why is nobody talking to the... It's loony, okay? So let's talk about what's similar, all right? What's similar between it being a district and it having been a department is that the Board of Mayor and Aldermen appropriates a bottom line figure to the schools. They have no line item authority over the school budget. What does that mean? That means that they can't determine how much is going to be in salaries and benefits and school books and transportation. They can't dictate any of the line items. That is solely the purview of the school board. It is as a district. It was as a department. The school board will not take policy direction from either the mayor, who is a member of the school board, or the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. In other words, they can't tell the school board what their policies have to be. They can't pass a motion to tell the school board, hey, you can't have policies that lie to our parents. You can't have policies that effectively allow the schools to socially transition 8-year-old kids who think they're in the wrong body without so much as notice to their parents, never mind confirmation. So the school board does not lose any policy autonomy. It does not lose any budgeting authority. It does not lose the ability to hire and fire its own staff. It doesn't lose any of that. It always had it as a department. Okay? Now, what happened when they became separate? Well, a bunch of things happened when they became separate. They created their own financial system. See, it used to be that their financials, all of their spending, their revenues, etc., it used to be part of the city's system. So when I was the budget director or when I was an alderman and I wanted information about the school district's budget, I could go to the city finance office, or I could go to the city the city finance office, or I could get into my own system and I could look it up. Okay? Now, to say that is not a knock on the current finance department of the school district. It's not a knock at all. But they account for stuff very differently than what the aldermen are used to because they use a different system. And the aldermen can only get it through the school district. I would call the police budget person with questions I had about their budget, but I wouldn't call them if I were pulling some data out of it. Does that make sense? If I had questions about the data and I wanted to understand something, then I'd call their budget officer. But I wouldn't call, but I have to do that now, or any alderman, they have to do that now with the schools. What else changed? Human resources changed. Now, by the way, in saying this, the school department always had its own finance operation. It's just that they were doing their numbers and their input on the city system. So there was an integration of the financial system. If it were a department again, the city could require it to integrate its financial systems with the city's so that everybody was on the same page, everyone was using data the same way, and the aldermen had direct access to it, either if they chose to ask for it from the schools, or they could go to the city finance office and say, hey, I want to check in on some things on the school budget, okay? Same thing with human resources. Now, the mayor at the meeting said, you know what, human resources, well, you know, the city used to do, and maybe that happened 100 years ago. But, you know, the school department that once upon a time served over 17,000 students and now serves less than 12,000, they had their own HR operation, okay? And the way that things happen on the schools, by state law, every teacher technically has to be elected by the Board of School Committee, which is why every hiring decision gets put on a personnel report, which gets submitted to the school board and gets voted on by the school board. That's why our good friend Jim O'Connell was able to torpedo the hiring of our even better friend, Patrice Bernard, who was a volunteer paraprofessional at her kid's school, and she decided she wanted a job doing it full time, so she applied. But because O'Connell and company didn't like her often critical commentary of the school board and how it does business, they torpedoed her, and had she not been going through a divorce at the time, I suspect she probably would have filed a lawsuit because she was more than qualified for the job that she had been doing as a volunteer on a part-time basis for a very long time before then. But by state law, everybody who goes into a classroom has got to be hired by the school board. So the administration makes recommendations and the school board ratifies those recommendations. So, however, again, back in the days when I used to do budgets and sit on the Board of Aldermen, if I had questions about something, I could go to the HR office, I could see how many people got hired, I could see what they got paid, I knew what kind of teachers they were, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the first thing that Norman Tangway did when he took office as superintendent, which I believe was in 1998, was he cut off system access. He's like, no, we don't have to share that information with you. We're a school district. This is ultimately the stuff that led to them filing a lawsuit to separate. So, and actually he did it because, little background, right? So the budget that Norm Tangway inherited in his first year was the last budget I worked on as a mayoral assistant, as the budget director for the mayor, okay? So I knew that budget like I knew the back of my hand. And not too far into it, he was complaining about deficits and cost overruns, and you know, it was a total nightmare. So I asked him in public session what was causing these cost overruns, and he said special education. Well, it just so happened that in that budget there was a complete overhaul of the special education department within the schools that had been put together by Mark Hobson, who had moved from working for the schools to, who is the business administrator for the schools and went to work as the HR director for the city. So I picked up the phone and I asked for a hiring report from the HR office. And what did we discover? Well, the reorganization that was fully funded in the school board's budget wasn't being implemented. And it wasn't special ed that was causing the cost overruns, because when I took a look at the hiring report, I saw that there were, you know, I forget how many more regular education teachers hired than special education teachers, and the average salary of the teacher in regular ed was, you know, $1,000 or $2 a year higher than the average salary of the people hired on the special ed side. And none of the support staff, none of the paraprofessionals that were included in the budget had been hired, so it couldn't have been special ed. They were just doing what they wanted to do, and they didn't want anybody to know what they were doing. So after I popped them in public session at a follow-up with all of that information, well, they decided that having the ability so they started building their own systems so that the aldermen could no longer look in and see what they were doing. So if it's a department again, Those two things can be brought together, and even though the city human resources office wouldn't have much to do, if anything, it wouldn't be involved at all in the hiring of any school staff. Well, having to have everything input into the city's unified human resources system would give the alderman the ability to get data from the city's HR office. Same thing with the legal. There might be some stuff that the city solicitor's office could do, but likely wouldn't because education law is pretty specialized, and the city solicitor never had a role to play in school department affairs. They always had outside counsel, but when it came to questions about the charter and what was and wasn't legal under the charter, instead of the school district, which it does now, hiring its own outside counsel to give them the opinion that they want, the city solicitor's office would sit in authority over that. And there may or may not be some opportunity to integrate the general IT systems, but because that's pretty specific. But all in all, it allows for the integration of two very key systems in the city, and that is personnel and finance. And if you do that, you dramatically increase the amount of information that the alderman can get on the schools while dramatically decreasing the level of difficulty in getting that information. The other thing that happens, and Baines did actually say this, well, I think when we were a department, SROs came in when I was a principal. Those were the school resource officers. That's the family, the friendly way of saying, the cops in the schools, SROs, right? And the city paid for that. Well, the city still does pay for that, except it's a shell game now. So we give the school district money for school resource officers. We give them money to maintain the playgrounds. We give them money to maintain the buildings. We used to give them money to maintain the nurses, but now they're officially no longer part of the city and they're part of the schools. So we give them money for all of this stuff. It's like north of $10 million a year now, I believe. Okay, and they're called chargebacks. So we give them money, we the taxpayers, give the schools the money for, for cleaning and maintaining the building, repairing the buildings, hiring the police officers, taking care of the parks, the playgrounds, your snow removal, all of that fun stuff, okay? And the school district pays it back. So the city gives them the money, and on the revenue side of the ledger, it shows revenues coming in from the schools to pay for the services that the city gave them money to pay for. Because the city, Parks and Rec, Facilities Division, Police Department, Fire Department, they all provide the services that the schools need. So we appropriate that money to the school board. We show it as a revenue on the city side of the budget. And the school board has to pay it back to the city to receive the services, and they invariably and inevitably complain, bitch, moan, groan, and everything else about having to pay the city. Maybe we'll go find someone else to do our parks. Okay, you go do that. Because you go do that. And that's the way it works. So if they were a department of the city again, this whole stupid chargeback system, which just creates a lot of paperwork to be reviewed and busy work for the people who have to create the paperwork, it all goes away. So does the school board lose any of its policy autonomy? No. Does the school board lose any of its line item budget authority? No. Does the school board lose any of its staff in the HR or the finance departments? No. The only thing that changes is the ability to integrate the systems, get rid of the chargebacks, and provide greater transparency and therefore accountability to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. An alderman or even the mayor can't do what I was able to do back in the late 90s before they became a district because the systems were integrated. Period, full stop, end of story. So they're making a great big production out of all of this, and they're comparing this charter to that charter, and they're looking at the state laws and like, oh my God, this is such a complicated thing. What are we going to do? Our heads are going to explode. No, it just goes back to the way it was. And for me, that's enough because it means the schools can no longer screen, rig, or otherwise obscure the data that the aldermen need to know what's going on. because it will all come through the system. So would there be an expense to integrate the systems? Probably, but what the hell? In a city where you have elected officials who actually complain that getting a $47 million increase in spending inside of 2 calendar years is not enough to fund the school district, I suppose we'll just have to continue to ramp it up. Speaking of money, let's get to the whole idea. Now, I am going to send off an inquiry, so you're getting this here first. But when the schools submitted their budget, they anticipated using $4.5 million in what they are dishonestly calling rainy day funds. Okay, we've gone over this, but a quick reminder. They have what are called expendable trusts. I read them to you here. The expendable trust basically says that if you have a cost overrun in certain line items, like special education and health insurance, there are three others, but 4 others. There's special education. So if you have a cost overrun in those line items, then you may the school board on its own vote can transfer money out of that specific trust fund to cover the shortfall. Okay, this is what they're calling a quote rainy day fund. So when Bob Baines, as he did, said, "Well, yeah, rainy day," well, the aldermen aren't using their rainy day fund to balance their budget, but we are, and he's all upset over how bad the cliff is and how much money they're using. Yet he voted for it. Okay, so if the money is going to be used for something other than the specifically intended purpose, i.e. health insurance expendable trust to handle cost overruns in the health insurance line item, then the school board can't do it. The Board of Mayor and Aldermen must, by 10 votes, that by a 2/3 majority, they have to have at least 10 votes, has to approve it. So here's the thing. I have been pushing behind the scenes to tell people that there needs to be a separate and specific vote, because there always used to, until Joyce Craig, there was one, where if the school board wanted to use money from the expendable trusts for a purpose other than it was designed for, it had to be approved by 2/3 of the aldermen. 10. So even if 2 of them didn't show up, it still had to be 10 votes, because it's written as 2/3 of the aldermen elect, which means 2/3 of the total number of aldermen, whether they're present or not. Well, in the budget that got submitted to the mayor, they proposed $4.5 million in rainy day funds. They took money out of the emergency savings, called it a revenue, so they could cheat the tax cap and increase their spending. Well, after the $3.5 million increase, which to them was an $8 million cut, they went back and sharpened their pencils, and they took another $4.3 million out of those trusts. So now we're not looking at $4.5 million. We're looking at $9.3 million. They took I said 4.3. They took another $4.8 million out of those trusts, for a grand total of 9.3. Well, when I was asking the city clerk about this, and I have the email, the city clerk said they're authorized by the board's action to take $4.5 million out. And I said, okay, well, what about the other $4.8 million that they're using? It also turns out that one of the trusts that they're using was never actually established by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. There was a great big discussion about it, but they never followed through. That would be the Teaching and Learning Trust that got a whole bunch of cash when Concord coughed up a bunch of cash back during Dr. Vargas's time in office, or it might have been Dr. Goldhart. I forget. It was right on the cusp there. And the Board of Mayor and Aldermen allowed them to put it into the Teaching and Learning Trust. Problem is they never followed through and adopted a resolution establishing the trust. But that's a different issue. So now we're looking at a situation where the school board is going to use double the amount of money that they are authorized to use from the trusts, and nobody at the Board of Mayor and Aldermen seems to give a damn. See, this is what happens when, instead of taking the votes that you should be taking to allow things that require votes to happen, You just kind of wrap it all up in the general discussion over passing the budget, which is why last year's budget, the one that expires this June 30th, okay, which didn't pass the Board of Mayor and Aldermen with 10 votes, was, in my opinion, an illegal budget because it used $9 million in these so-called one-time revenues from the expendable trusts as revenue. So remember, when the school board says, hey, you know, it's a tax cap compliant budget. No, it's not. The fact that the Board of Mayor and Aldermen isn't doing its job to establish the parameters or to enforce the parameters of the tax cap by requiring spending cuts to offset the loss of non-property tax revenue, which is either state aid or tuition or their one-time revenues. We're, like, was it the third, maybe fourth year in a row now where we're using one-time revenues? How many times does it have to be used before it's no longer a one-time revenue? Meanwhile, I'm going to move on to something. The Board of School Committee is all bent out of shape. They are demanding that the governor veto House Bill 324 because it's book banning, they say. And watching that, it's clear to me that the people on the school board did not read this bill, including, if not especially, the ones that said they did, because when I read to you the sections of the bill that they're complaining about, you're going to ask yourself what the problem is. On one hand, they're saying, well, we already have policies to deal with this. On the other hand, they're screaming about how they're losing local control. I don't know how you can have both. But House Bill 324, which is on its way to the governor's desk, hopefully to be signed, is named an act relative to prohibiting obscene or harmful sexual materials in schools. So, Sean Parr, who chairs the legislative committee, he's a school board member from Ward 2, he complained that, well, they didn't define specifically what is allowed to be banned or not banned or anything else. He either doesn't understand what the bill does or he's lying about what the bill does. It can't be both. I mean, I suppose it could be both, but can't have it both ways. So let me tell you what the bill does before I give you the definitions that he says don't exist in the language. The bill says, no later than November 1st, 2026, each local school board shall adopt a complaint resolution policy consistent with this section to be used to address complaints submitted by parents or guardians alleging that material that is harmful to minors has been provided or is currently available to a student enrolled in the local school system who is the child of such parent or guardian. The policy shall be posted on the district's website. The complaint resolution process shall, at a minimum, require that. So what they're calling a book banning bill is, in fact, a requirement that the local school boards set up a policy whereby parents who feel there is inappropriate material in a school, whether it's a library or a classroom lesson, can petition the city, can petition the school district to have it removed. This is what they're calling book banning. Complaints shall be submitted in writing to the principal of the school where the student is enrolled, and complaints shall provide a reasonably detailed description. Broadcast failed. Shall provide a reasonably detailed description of the material that is alleged to be harmful to minors within 14 calendar days. Oh, that's what I was going to say. The funny thing is one of the policies that Dr. Sean Parr read about how we already have this for objectionable material when teaching human sexual activity or whatever they call it. What he failed to understand was that policy resulted from a law that Victoria Sullivan, as a state representative, got passed. This is kind of funny because they're beating their chest about, hey, we have a policy that deals with this. Yeah, you have the policy because the state of New Hampshire passed a law that says thou shalt have a policy. Okay, let's see. So complaints must be submitted in writing, shall be submitted to writing to the principal of the school where the student is enrolled, and complaints shall provide a reasonably detailed description of the material that is alleged to be harmful to minors within 14 calendar days of receiving the written complaint. Unless another time frame is mutually agreed upon, the school principal or his or her designee shall review the complaint and take reasonable steps to investigate the allegations in the complaint, including but not limited to reviewing the material that is alleged to be harmful to minors, if it is available, and meeting with the parent or guardian who submitted the complaint. The school principal or his or her designee shall determine whether the material is subject to complaint is harmful to minors. The school principal, blah, 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 shall determine whether student access to the material that is the subject of the complaint shall be removed or restricted within 10 days of receiving the complaint, unless another schedule is mutually agreed by the parent or permanent guardian and the school principal or his designee, the school principal or... So, okay. It sets up a requirement that the school board set up a policy, and if you want to make it easy, you can cut and paste literally the language of the law and say, this is our policy. Now, this is just another long line of examples in the Manchester School District where they are hostile to parents having the ability to do things like this. Just like they're hostile to parents knowing whether or not little Johnny is pretending to be little Susie in his second grade class. Just like they're hostile, I just, and then God love him, Peter Ardropoulos. Well, do you know, Mr. Parr, Dr. Parr, whether or not any of the people who wrote this bill were educators or consulted with educators? Because, you know, I'm all happy about having a conversation, but this is a book banning bill. What are we banning here? And frankly, there probably are materials. Why do you think these laws, you know, the law that Victoria Sullivan, got through the legislature back in, what was it, 2017 or something like that? Why do you think that law happened? That law happened because there were grossly inappropriate things being done with or taught about human sexuality without parental notification or consent. Sorry. Well, there was a Republican in North Dakota that that vetoed a similar bill to this, and our Republican governor should do the same. I didn't look up that bill. Was it one that set up a complaint mechanism for parents to bring concerns forward, first to the school, then to the school board, and if necessary, to the State Board of Education? Because that's the track here. The track says, hey, if you got a problem, write a letter to the principal. If you don't like the principal's decision, you get to appeal it to the school board. If you don't like the school board's decision, you get to appeal it to the State Board of Education. Oh, and by the way, if you're a school district and you, or a teacher within the schools, and the principal says, hey, it's not appropriate, or the school board said, hey, it's not appropriate, or the Board of Education says, hey, it's not appropriate, and you use it anyway, well, there are going to be professional sanctions. Oh, so here are the definitions that Sean Parr said were obscure. Nudity. Oh, so let me see. So here are obscure, vague. Material means any printed matter, visual presentation, web-based content, live performance, or sound recording, including but not limiting to books, magazines, motion picture films, pamphlets, pornographic records, pictures, photographs, figures, statues, plays, dances, or other representation. Nudity shall mean the showing of the human male or female genitalia, pubic area, or buttocks with less than a fully opaque covering, or the showing of the female breast, which is less than fully opaque covering of any portion thereof below the top of the nipple, or the depiction of covered male genitalia in a discernibly turgid state. A mother's breastfeeding of her baby shall not under any circumstance constitute nudity, irrespective of whether or not the nipple is covered during the incidental to feeding. Yeah, well, in this, by the way, this is Jim O'Connell saying, yeah, they seem to be overly concerned with female anatomy. Sadomasochistic abuse shall mean flagellation by torture by or upon a person animal, or condition of being fettered, bound, or otherwise physically restrained for the purpose of deriving sexual satisfaction or satisfaction brought about as a result of sadistic violence from inflicting harm on another or receiving such harm oneself. Sexual conduct shall mean actual or simulated sexual intercourse, deviant sexual intercourse, sexual bestiality, masturbation, or sadomasochistic abuse, actual or stimulated lewd exhibition of the genitals, actual physical contact with a person's clothed or unclothed genitals, public area, buttocks, or if such a person is female, breast with the intent to arouse or gratify the sexual desire of either party, or any contact, blah, 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 blah. Sexual excitement means the condition of the human male or female genitals when in a state of sexual stimulation or arousal. For purposes of this subdivision, material is harmful to minors when, taken as a whole, it predominantly appeals to the prurient, shameful, or morbid interest of minors. The material depicts or describes nudity, sexual conduct, sexual excitement, or sadomasochistic abuse in a manner that is patently offensive to prevailing standards to the adult community with respect to what is suitable for minors. The material lacks serious literary, scientific, medical, artistic, or political value for minors, and the material is inappropriate to the age of the minor to whom it is being made available or presented. I don't know about you, but it seems pretty specific what they're trying to avoid being in the schools, and not for nothing. They didn't ban any books. They didn't come to any declaration. They didn't say Hustler magazine is not allowed. They said there are a lot of concerns out there by parents who should have the opportunity to weigh in, to bring their complaints in an orderly, organized fashion to school officials. Here is the process that you need to establish a policy to do in your school district. It goes to the principal, from the principal to the school board, from the school board to the State Board of Education. Why does anybody have a problem with that? Why? Why is anyone calling this a book ban bill? What books are being banned? What's happening here? I don't know. It seems to me that the schools just want to do what they want to do, which gets us to the next thing. Crissy Kantor once again came at the school board, as did Camille Crafey, who ran for school board in Ward 12 a couple last cycle out. I don't know if she's going to run again, but Crissy Kantor brought the wheel of power and privilege back and asked the school board if it did its homework, because she brought it to them last week. And she hopes in 2 weeks from now they'll do the homework so they can see where they fall in the wheel of power and privilege. And she made some really great points, but the thing that was really interesting is Sue Ellen Hannon, who is the president of the union, who got herself in the contract that was authorized by the school board after I left and was no longer chairing negotiations, got herself this prime plum of a job. She gets to get paid as a teacher. She gets to have her teacher school year. She gets to have all of the perks and benefits of being a teacher without teaching a class. Is they created a special position just for her as the union president in the district offices overseeing, guess what? Professional development and teacher certifications. Right. Because, just like the city of Manchester apparently needs to provide a gym for its police officers because every 3 years they have to pass a physical fitness test to remain certified, the city of Manchester, so they have to do that at your expense as taxpayers, of course. The city of Manchester, school district pays for and otherwise provides teachers with certification services. I'm saying this as a guy who has multiple licenses in multiple states, who's got to do continuing education, got to maintain his licenses, has got to do it on his own dime. Most people, why should my company pay for something that I can pick up and take to another company if I left? Why should the city of Manchester pay for something that, certification, whatever the teachers need to keep their licenses up? Why should we pay for that for them when they can pick up and they can go to another school district, right? Just saying. So Sue Ellen Hannon comes up and she says, well now, that wheel you were given was not actually what was used with students in the classroom. Really? This is one of the things that I'm in the process of verifying because I got a scanned copy of that wheel that was told to me was given to the parents who gave it to the person who gave it to me by the student who had to do it in the classroom. Huh. But since she is in charge of professional development, maybe she could explain what was given. And, Crissy Kantor made a great point because, the school district, the board, the administration, they're investigating the teacher. They're going after the teacher who did it. Now, I frankly have no doubt that the teacher who did it is probably, on board with all of this woke stuff. And, by the way, funny thing of the night. When Bob Baines was principal at West High School, he was there for 20 years, and not once did any parent ever complain about any book in his school. Bob, you've been retired from your principalship at West High School longer than you were principal, and in case you haven't noticed, things have changed just a little bit. This bill is before the New Hampshire State Legislature because there are books in New Hampshire schools, as there are books across the country, where this kind of grotesque content is being given to kids at all grade levels, including kindergarten, first, and second grade. We've seen examples across the country, and even in our own legislature, where people will come up and read these books, and they'll get gavelled down for using profanity by the chair of their school board. It's okay to be in the second grader's library, but it's not okay to be read at the school board meeting. This is the kind of filth that's in the public schools. So, the wheel of power and privilege continues to spin with the school board now defending it, saying that because we no longer, they said, well, we had an Office of Civil Rights consent decree that we've just been out of for just a year because this school district was actively disadvantaging Black and Latino students, according to Christopher Potter, who knows nothing. And they found that we were guilty of not treating all students equally. No, what the OCR, the Office of Civil Rights of the Department of Education, is a wickedly political organization that takes a look at numbers in the abstract, and it compares the performance of students who are of various races to each other, right? And whenever they're talking about minority students, they always exclude Asians because Asians blow everybody off the chart. But they said, oh, well, Manchester didn't have enough Latino and Black students in its upper level classes. So they created sanctions, a consent decree, and Manchester had to go do. Now they're all at Christopher Potter, Jim O'Connell, I forget who else. There were two other members of the board. Might have been Baines and Turner, but I'm not entirely sure about that. All complaining that without the stuff like this, we could be back under the thumb of the Office of Civil Rights. Yeah. Well, the fact of the matter is that Manchester never actively discouraged children of color from getting into those upper level classes. I've got big flashing yellow lights saying I have to go now. So that's a topic for a different time. I will tell you that when I was on the school board, I dug hard into these numbers. And I'll just leave it at this. The number one performing subgroup of Manchester students were Black girls from an intact two-parent home. So that ought to tell you something about demographics and what really is the cause of where kids end up in school. It has little to do with their race, and it certainly never had anything to do with the City of Manchester schools actively preventing kids from accessing upper-level classes. I am your ever-humble host, Rich Girard. Thanks for tuning in. Until next week, be good, be well, don't do anything we wouldn't do. We're proud to have in the audience. Thanks so much for being there. Good night.